My dad threw my gift in the garbage, so I made sure he'd regret it. His calls didn't stop the next day. Growing up, I could draw the floor plan of my father's hardware factory from memory. Every corner, every machine, every chipped ceiling tile. I spent my childhood hiding under workbenches, watching rough hands piece together tools that would later hang in garages across the country. Hammerhead Manufacturing wasn't just my dad's business. It was our family legacy. 3 generations of Fowlers had run it before him, and everyone expected I'd be the 5th, but not in the way I imagined. "Alex, stop daydreaming and hand me that wrench," my father would bark, never looking up from whatever he was fixing. Even on weekend visits to the factory, Robert Fowler was all business. While other kids got taken to baseball games, I got impromptu lessons on torque specifications and metal grades. "Pay attention," he'd say. "One day, all this will be yours." What Dad never understood was that I was paying attention, just not to the things he thought were important. I noticed how our products hadn't changed since the 80s. How younger customers weren't interested in the bulky, single-purpose tools Hammerhead manufactured. How online retail was overtaking the hardware stores where Dad had cultivated relationships for decades. I saw the writing on the wall long before he did. That's why I chose industrial design and engineering in college, much to his disappointment. He wanted me to study business administration, to learn the practical side of running Hammerhead. But I had bigger plans. The business needs innovation, not just management, I tried explaining during holiday breaks. We need to adapt. Dad would just chuckle and pat my head like I was still 12. "There's a reason hammers haven't changed in centuries. Sweetie, some things don't need fixing." During my senior year, I poured everything into my capstone project, a compact multi-tool I called the Fix Kit. It was sleek, about the size of a smartphone, but slightly thicker, with fold-out components that could handle the 20 most common household repairs. The genius was in the ergonomics and the materials, lightweight but strong alloys that could bear the stress of real work. I 3D printed dozens of prototypes, tested them on classmates, iterated based on feedback. My professors were impressed. One even suggested I apply for a patent. "This could really be something," Professor Winter said, turning the prototype over in her hands. "It's intuitive in a way most multi-tools aren't." I beamed with pride, already imagining how this could be the key to Hammerhead's revival. The perfect blend of our heritage with modern innovation. Dad would finally see I had something valuable to contribute. Graduation came and went. I moved back home temporarily, planning my next steps. Dad's business was struggling more visibly now. Fewer workers on the floor, more silence in the once bustling factory. Still, he refused to discuss it. "Just a temporary slump," he'd insist over dinner. "Been through worse." His birthday arrived on a sweltering June day. Mom had planned a small gathering, just us and a few of his oldest friends from the industry. I spent the morning wrapping my gift, hands trembling slightly with anticipation. This wasn't just a present, it was my bid for a place at the table. When the cake was cut and the whiskey poured, I handed him the small box. "What's this?" he asked, smiling but distracted. One of his suppliers had just canceled a major order, and I could tell his mind was elsewhere. "Open it," I urged. "It might help with the business." Inside was my refined Fix Kit prototype, now in Hammerhead's traditional navy blue and silver colors. I'd even engraved our logo onto it. "It's a multifunctional compact tool," I explained, as he turned it over in his weathered hand. 20 functions in one, perfect for DIY enthusiasts and apartment dwellers who don't have space for full toolboxes. I designed it specifically. "This," he interrupted, eyebrows raised, "this little thing is supposed to save Hammerhead?" His friends leaned in to look, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Not just this exact design," I clarified, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "But this approach, smaller, more versatile products for a different customer base. We could branch out beyond traditional hardware stores, sell direct to consumer online, reach young." Dad laughed. Not a kind laugh, a dismissive one that cut through the room like a bandsaw. "This is a toy, Alex. A gimmick. I spent over a year developing it," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "The engineering is sound. Professor Winters even suggested I patent." "Professors," he scoffed, looking to his friends, who nodded in agreement. "What do they know about actual manufacturing? About market realities?" Mom placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Robert, maybe give it a chance. Alex worked really hard. This isn't arts and crafts, Dad snapped. Then, looking directly at me, stick to pretty ideas, not tools. Leave this to the men who understand the business. The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Phil coughed awkwardly. Mom's face fell, but all I could focus on was what happened next. Dad stood up, walked across his workshop where we'd gathered for cake, and dropped my FixKit prototype into the large metal trash bin beside his workbench. It made a hollow clang as it hit the bottom. Now, he said, clapping his hands together, who needs another drink? Something inside me went very, very still. I'd expected resistance, maybe even rejection. But not this casual cruelty, not public humiliation. Yet somehow, I managed to smile, to laugh it off, to pour drinks and cut more cake, to pretend I wasn't standing over the grave of a dream I'd nurtured for years. The party wound down around 9. Dad's friends clapped him on the back, made plans for fishing on Sunday. Mom cleaned up, shooting me sympathetic glances. No one mentioned the incident. Don't take it personally, Mom whispered as she hugged me goodnight. He's just stressed about the business. He doesn't mean it, but he did mean it. That was the thing about my father. He always meant exactly what he said, and what he'd said was that my ideas weren't worth consideration. That, despite my degree, my research, my genuine passion for our family business, I would always just be the boss's daughter playing at being an engineer. I waited until the house was quiet, until I heard Dad's rumbling snores from the master bedroom. Then I crept back to his workshop, flipped on the small desk lamp, and retrieved my prototype from the trash. As I held it under the light, examining it for damage, something crystallized inside me. A resolve that hadn't been there before. A cold clarity that burned away hurt feelings and left only determination. My father had made a grave miscalculation. He thought throwing away my idea would be the end of it. That I'd fall in line, accept a token position at Hammerhead, and never challenge him again. He was wrong. I turned the prototype over in my hands, its weight familiar and reassuring. In that moment, looking at what he had so casually discarded, I made a decision that would change everything. If he wouldn't let me save Hammerhead my way, I'd build something of my own, something he couldn't control or dismiss. Something that would force him to see what he'd thrown away. I slipped the prototype into my pocket and switched off the light. The plan forming in my mind should have scared me. It meant risking everything, burning bridges, potentially failing spectacularly. Instead, it felt like freedom. My father had always told me that business was a battlefield. He just never expected me to declare war. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Gone was the need for my father's approval, replaced by a burning determination to prove him wrong. Not with words, but results. I took a job at a local hardware retailer to keep up appearances. The pay was mediocre, but it gave me two things I desperately needed: insider knowledge of current market trends and a perfect excuse to be out of the house. Dad assumed I was finding my footing after college. In reality, I was building my escape route. Every night after my shift, I'd slip into a small co-working space I'd rented across town. It wasn't much, just a desk in a corner of a renovated warehouse where other startups and freelancers worked. But it was mine, away from my father's judgmental gaze. I refined my prototype relentlessly. The FixKit needed to be perfect. Not just good enough to sell, but good enough to disrupt. I called in favors from engineering classmates, consulted with a patent attorney I could barely afford, and maxed out my credit card on materials and manufacturing research. "You look exhausted," Mom commented one morning, as I gulped down coffee before heading to my retail job. "Are you sleeping enough?" "I'm fine," I lied. I wasn't fine. I was obsessed. But it was the kind of obsession that gives purpose. 3 months into my double life, I had a final design and a manufacturing contact in Taiwan, willing to produce a small initial run. The cost cleaned out my savings account, but I convinced myself it was just seed money. An investment in my future and my revenge. While waiting for production, I built a website from scratch, teaching myself basic coding and e-commerce principles through tutorial videos. FixKit would launch solely online, no brick-and-mortar middlemen, no traditional distribution channels. Everything my father swore by, I deliberately avoided. The first shipment arrived on a rainy Tuesday, 50 units, each in sleek packaging I'd designed myself. I stared at the boxes stacked in my small apartment, terror and elation washing over me in equal measure. This was real now. That night, at dinner, Dad complained about another canceled order at Hammerhead. "These online retailers are finishing traditional hardware," he muttered. "Nobody values craftsmanship anymore." I pushed food around my plate, saying nothing. In 12 hours, I would become exactly what he despised. The FixKit website went live at midnight. I'd scraped together enough for minimal advertising, targeted social media ads focused on DIY enthusiasts, apartment dwellers, and first-time homeowners. Demographics Hammerhead had always ignored. The first week was agonizing. 3 sales, then 5, then nothing for 2 days. I checked analytics excessively, tweaked product descriptions, adjusted pricing. This had to work. Then came the email that changed everything. "Hi there. I run a DIY channel called Apartment Fixer with 500K subscribers. Saw your FixKit ad and I'm intrigued. Would love to review it if you could send a sample."
Mia.
I shipped it overnight, including a handwritten note, but no demands or expectations. 3 weeks later, Mia posted her review. "This little tool has literally replaced my entire toolbox," she gushed, demonstrating each function. "Perfect for small spaces and quick fixes. Honestly, it's revolutionary." Orders started pouring in, 10 on the first day after the review, then 30, then hundreds. My inventory was gone in a week. I scrambled to place a larger order with my manufacturer, using revenue from the first batch, this time 500 units. I upgraded packaging, added a warranty card, included a QR code linking to tutorial videos I'd hastily filmed in my apartment. All while working my retail job, all while sitting across from my father at dinner, listening to him rant about declining sales and changing markets. "Young people today don't understand quality," he'd say, as I nodded sympathetically, the irony burning in my chest. By month 4, I had to quit my retail job. The excuse to my parents, "I'm exploring other opportunities." The truth, FixKit required my full attention. I moved operations to a small warehouse space, hired 2 part-time college students to help with packaging and shipping. We were still tiny, but growing faster than I could have imagined. Dad noticed my absence, but attributed it to youth and flakiness. "Still finding yourself?" he'd ask, with a hint of condescension when I did make it home for dinner. "Something like that," I'd reply. Little did he know I'd found exactly what I was looking for. Independence, validation, and the first pieces of a plan that would eventually bring Hammerhead to its knees. I wasn't just building a product anymore. I was building a competitor. And soon, he would feel the consequence of throwing my dreams in the trash. The storm was brewing, and I was just getting started. I noticed it first during my increasingly rare visits home for Sunday dinner. The company truck in the driveway had a new dent, unfixed. Dad's premium whiskey had been replaced with a cheaper brand. Mom mentioned cutting back on her community activities to help with the books. Meanwhile, Hammerhead Manufacturing was showing visible signs of decline. 6 months into running FixKit, I barely recognized my life. I'd moved out of my parents' house into a modest apartment closer to my now expanding warehouse. We'd grown to 15 employees, mostly part-timers, but all dedicated to the vision. Our social media following had exploded after a series of how-to videos went viral. And sales were climbing steadily month over month. Small things, but telling. "I'm sorry," I said, and I partly meant it. Jenkins had always been kind to me, sneaking me candy when I visited the factory as a kid. "We had to let Jenkins go last week," Dad mentioned one Sunday, stabbing at his roast beef. 30 years with the company. "Hardest thing I've ever done." "It's the economy," Dad continued, his face flushing with anger. "And these cheap imports flooding the market. People don't understand quality anymore." Mom shot me a look that said, "Don't argue. Not tonight." I nodded and changed the subject, guilt and vindication battling in my chest. Jenkins was collateral damage in a fight he didn't even know was being waged. That hadn't been part of my plan. 2 weeks later, I met with a major retailer interested in carrying FixKit in their stores nationwide. The buyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa, laid out terms that would multiply our production needs tenfold. "Your timing is perfect," she explained. Traditional hardware vendors are struggling to connect with younger demographics. Your product fills that gap. Any specific competitors you're moving away from? I asked casually. She checked her notes. Several. Hammerhead is one we're phasing out. Shame, really. They were reliable, but haven't innovated in years. That weekend, Dad called a family meeting. Mom looked worried when I arrived. My younger brother Tyler, still in high school, and oblivious to the brewing storm, was playing video games on the couch. I signed the contract that afternoon, my hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. We need to talk about the future, Dad announced, pacing the living room. Hammerhead is facing challenges. For the first time in my life, my father looked small, defeated. His shoulders hunched, hair grayer than I remembered. He outlined the situation: canceled orders, increasing debt, dwindling customer base. They might need to remortgage the house. But we'll pull through, he insisted, forcing confidence into his voice. We always have. As he spoke, I noticed a business magazine on the coffee table. My heart stopped. On the cover, Rising Stars in Hardware, How FixKit is Revolutionizing Home Repair. The issue was open to the feature article, with photos of my products, my company. Dad hadn't mentioned it. Did he not know? Or was he saving that confrontation for later? I excused myself early, claiming a work emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. Some flashy startup called FixKit is stealing our customers, he shouted. Something crashed, likely the newspaper hitting the wall. Gimmicky garbage. No loyalty anymore. That night, I witnessed the next crack in my father's empire firsthand. I'd stopped by to drop off some of Mom's favorite chocolates, a small gesture to ease my conscience. As I approached the front door, I heard my father's voice, raised in anger. The following Thursday, I was reviewing production schedules when my phone chimed with a news alert from the local business journal. Hammerhead Manufacturing cancels annual trade show appearance amid financial concerns. I froze on the porch, keys in hand. Robert? Please? Mom's voice, trying to calm him. You'll give yourself another stress headache. It's not just them, he continued, his voice breaking slightly, but they're the worst of it. Taking our Baker Street hardware account last month, that was 20% of our remaining business. Maybe, Mom suggested cautiously. You could look at their designs, see what's working for them. I hadn't known that. Baker Street had approached us, not the other way around. I don't need to copy some trendy nonsense to save my father's company, he roared. I silently placed the chocolates on the doorstep and left, my stomach in knots. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? To show him I was right? To make him regret dismissing me? Then why did victory taste so bitter? That night, I received an email from a business journalist working on a profile of emerging hardware companies, disrupting traditional manufacturers, would love to feature FixKit's founder. I stared at it for an hour before replying. The walls between my two worlds were crumbling. Soon, my father would discover exactly who was behind the company he so despised. And when he did, everything would change. The email from Rebecca Chen at Tech Innovators magazine seemed innocent enough, following up on our interview about FixKit's disruption of the traditional hardware market. Would you be available to clarify a few details? I'd spoken with her the previous week, carefully avoiding mentioning my connection to Hammerhead Manufacturing. The article was scheduled to run next month, plenty of time, I thought, to prepare for the inevitable fallout. What I didn't know was that Rebecca had done her homework. Her response to my availability came swiftly. Great. One more thing. I noticed Hammerhead Manufacturing is based in your hometown, and the owner shares your last name. For thoroughness, I've reached out to Robert Fowler for comment about your competing business model. Looking forward to incorporating both perspectives. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the office floor. My assistant Jen looked up, alarmed. Everything okay? It wasn't. Not remotely. I called Rebecca immediately, trying to sound casual. About that Hammerhead connection. Oh yes, she replied cheerfully. I already emailed Mr. Fowler this morning. Asked for a quote from your daughter about her startup's impact on your business. Standard journalistic practice to get both sides. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I see. Is there a problem? Rebecca asked, her journalist's instinct detecting my panic. No, I lied. No problem at all. I spent the day in a fog, jumping at every phone notification. Dad would be furious, but perhaps he wouldn't make the connection immediately. Perhaps he'd dismiss the email as a mistake. The delusion lasted until 8:37 that evening. I was reviewing quarterly projections when my apartment buzzer shrieked. Through the intercom came a voice I barely recognized, my father's, distorted by rage. "Open the door, Alex. Now." I buzzed him in, heart hammering. As I waited those eternal seconds for the elevator to deliver him to my floor, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked terrified, but underneath that fear was something else. Relief. The secret was out. The dual life opened. The pounding on my door made me flinch. He didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past me the moment I opened the door. Dad stood in my living room, red-faced, a crumpled printout clutched in his fist. "Is it true?" he demanded, voice shaking. "Are you behind FixKit?" I straightened my shoulders. "Yes." "You did this?" He was almost shouting now. "You used me to build your knockoff empire?" "Used you?" I repeated, genuinely confused. "Don't play innocent. You stole my customer contacts, my supplier relationships." "I did nothing of the sort," I cut in. "Every relationship I built from scratch. With knowledge gained from my company. My life's work." I could have argued, could have shouted back about how he'd never shared anything valuable with me, always keeping me at arm's length from the real business. But what was the point? Instead, I walked to my home office, retrieved the original FixKit prototype, the one he'd thrown away, and placed it on the coffee table between us. "You threw my idea in the garbage," I said quietly. I picked it up and ran with it. The silence that followed was deafening. He stared at the prototype, then at me, his expression shifting from rage to something more complex. "This was never about hurting Hammerhead," I continued, surprised by my own calmness. "It is about proving I could build something valuable, something you refused to see. By becoming my competition? By taking my customers?" "I didn't target your customers specifically. I created new ones you never bothered to reach." He sank onto my couch, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The factory is weeks away from closing. 37 people will lose their jobs." The guilt hit hard, but I pushed back. "And how many times did I try to help, to suggest new directions? You shut me down at every turn. Because that's not how business works. You don't abandon established markets for what? The future?" I gestured around my apartment, where FixKit prototypes and marketing materials cover every surface. "This is the future, Dad. I tried to bring it to Hammerhead, and you literally threw it away." He stood abruptly. "Your grandfather would be ashamed." The words were meant to wound, and they did. But not enough to make me back down. "Maybe," I admitted, "or maybe he would have recognized a good idea when he saw one, regardless of where it came from." Dad moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. For a moment I thought he might apologize, might acknowledge even a fraction of what I'd accomplished. Instead, "This isn't over." The door slammed behind him, rattling the frame. It wasn't over, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. In the weeks that followed, my phone filled with voicemails from my father, some angry, some pleading, all increasingly desperate as Hammerhead's situation deteriorated. I listened to each one, stored them in a special folder, but never called back. What was there to say? He'd made his position clear years ago. Now he was simply facing the consequences. The article ran in Tech Innovators magazine. "Family Disruption: How FixKit's founder revolutionized an industry despite her father's rejection." Orders doubled overnight. And still the voicemails kept coming. 3 months after the confrontation in my apartment, FixKit had expanded into a second warehouse. We now employed 63 people, more than Hammerhead Manufacturing had at its peak. Our products were in major retailers nationwide, and we'd just signed a distribution deal in Europe. The company I'd built from a discarded prototype was now valued at 8 figures. I was in the middle of a product development meeting when my assistant slipped me a note. "Your mother called. 3rd time today. Says it's urgent." Mom never called my work number. Something was wrong. I excused myself and returned the call immediately, my stomach tight with anxiety. "Alex." "Thank goodness," she answered, voice strained. "It's your father. He collapsed at the factory this morning. We're at Memorial Hospital." The world tilted. Whatever complicated feelings I had toward my father, I never wanted this. Heart attack? I asked, already grabbing my keys. They're not sure yet, probably stress-related. He's stable, but I'm on my way. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. I found Mom in the waiting room, looking smaller than I remembered, clutching a paper cup of untouched coffee. How is he? I asked, embracing her. Resting. They're running tests. She studied my face. He's been trying to reach you. I know. He's not sleeping. Barely eating. The factory. She trailed off. I know that too. A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Fowler, your husband is awake. He's asking for both of you. Dad looked diminished against the white hospital sheets, monitors beeping steadily beside him. His eyes, when they met mine, held something I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. You came, he said, voice raspy. Of course I came. Mom excused herself to speak with the doctor, leaving us in a silence heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Dad broke it. Hammerhead is finished. The statement hung in the air. No anger, just resignation. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. He waved a hand weakly. The bank's calling in the loans next week. Can't make payroll. Most of the staff already jumped ship. His eyes fixed on mine. To your company, I hear. I'd hired 4 former Hammerhead employees in the past month, all highly skilled people I'd known since childhood. But I hadn't actively poached them. They'd applied after hearing about layoffs. They came to us, I said simply. Dad nodded, as if this confirmed something. You've built something impressive. I see that now. The admission so long awaited felt hollow in the sterile room with its beeping monitors. Look, he continued, maybe we can work something out. Combine forces. Merge. You could bring innovation, and I still have infrastructure. I stared at him, wondering if this was another hard issue speaking. You want to merge Hammerhead with FixKit? It makes sense. We're family. The Fowler name should stay united. That's not how business works, I said, echoing his own words back to him. His face darkened. This isn't just business. This is legacy. I thought about the workers he'd laid off when they suggested improvements. The talent he'd dismissed. The dreams he'd stomped on, including mine. Dad, there's no Hammerhead left to merge with. You have outdated equipment, mounting debt, no market share. We have the name, the history. History doesn't pay bills. He looked away. So you're content to watch your family's business die? Your grandfather built that factory with his bare hands. The guilt arrow found its mark, but I held firm. Hammerhead died the day you refused to evolve. This, I gestured to the hospital room, is just the funeral. Then buy me out, he said, surprising me again. Acquire what's left, save the jobs of the people still there. I considered it. FixKit could use additional manufacturing capacity, and there was something poetic about bringing everything full circle. I'll have my team look into it, I said cautiously. 2 days later, after he'd been released from the hospital, I sent my response. Not a merger proposal, but an acquisition offer. Detailed, professional, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. Hammerhead would be absorbed into FixKit. Dad would be listed only as former founder and historical consultant, with no decision-making power. The family name would be preserved in a small legacy collection, but the brand would otherwise cease to exist. It was fair, financially generous even, but devastating to his pride. I had my lawyer deliver it to their house. Mom called that evening, voice tight with disappointment. He read your offer. He's not well. The terms are non-negotiable, I said, surprising myself with my coldness. This isn't about terms, Alex. This is about family. It stopped being about family the day he threw my idea in the trash. She sighed, a sound of bone-deep weariness. When did you become so hard? I didn't answer. We both knew when. We both knew why. Dad never replied to the offer. The silence told me everything. The deadline passed. Hammerhead filed for bankruptcy the following week. I watched the news coverage from my office, feeling nothing but a dull ache where triumph should have been. The empire I'd built suddenly seemed hollow without the satisfaction of his acknowledgement. That night, lying awake, I wondered if winning at all costs had really been worth the price. 2 weeks after Hammerhead declared bankruptcy, I stood outside the factory where I'd spent my childhood. The for sale sign swayed gently in the autumn breeze. Through the dusty windows, I could see empty workbenches, dormant machinery, ghosts of a legacy my father couldn't preserve. I'd come alone, without telling anyone at FixKit, without telling my family. This visit wasn't in the business plan I'd presented to my investors. It was purely personal, a pilgrimage to the battlefield after the fight was won. My phone buzzed with a text from Jen, Singapore distributors on board. Contract signed. Another victory, another expansion. FixKit was growing faster than I could have imagined. But the triumph felt muted as I stared at my family's shuttered factory. I made my decision that afternoon. By evening, my lawyers had created a shell company with no visible connection to FixKit. By the end of the week, that company had purchased the Hammerhead factory, equipment, and intellectual property for pennies on the dollar. Dad didn't know, neither did Mom. The bankruptcy trustee dealt directly with my lawyers, who were instructed to maintain absolute confidentiality. Next came the calls, discreet, careful, to former Hammerhead employees. Not all of them, just the ones who'd shown creativity, who'd embraced new ideas despite my father's resistance. One by one, they returned to the factory they thought they'd left forever. Marcus, the floor manager who'd worked there for 30 years, wept when I offered him his job back. "I never thought I'd see these machines running again," he said, running his hand lovingly over a press that had been his responsibility for decades. "They almost didn't," I admitted. "But some things are worth saving." It took 3 months to modernize the facility. We installed new technology alongside the classic machinery, creating a hybrid manufacturing system that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The first products rolled off the line just before Christmas, a special heritage collection that merged Hammerhead's craftsmanship with FixKit's modern design philosophy. The media caught wind of it, eventually. Forbes ran a feature, FixKit founder resurrects family business on her own terms. Business schools requested case studies. I was invited to speak at entrepreneurship conferences, where eager students asked how it felt to disrupt an entire industry. "It feels complicated," I always answered honestly. Because it was complicated. Victory had come at the cost of my relationship with my father. We hadn't spoken since the hospital, though Mom provided occasional updates. He'd found part-time consulting work with a former competitor. His health was improving. He still refused to say my name. At the ribbon cutting for the renovated factory, I searched the crowd for his face, knowing he wouldn't be there but hoping nonetheless. Instead, I found my mother standing quietly at the back, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He knows you bought it," she said when I reached her. "He saw the Heritage Collection in a store last week." "What did he say?" "Nothing. But he kept the catalog." It was something, a tiny crack in the wall between us. 6 months later, FixKit had quadrupled in size. We'd expanded into international markets, launched 3 new product lines, and were featured in every major business publication. At an industry gala where I received an innovation award, the presenter introduced me as the woman who reinvented hardware for the modern era. As I took the stage, I spotted a familiar figure at a back table. My father, older, grayer, but unmistakably him. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away. He slipped out before I could reach him, after my speech. But the next day, a package arrived at my office. Inside was the original FixKit prototype I'd given him years ago. The one he'd thrown away, the one I'd retrieved from the trash. Attached was a note in his shaky handwriting. "You were right." Just that. No apology, no request for reconciliation. Just an acknowledgement I'd once desperately craved. I keep that prototype on my desk now. A reminder of where FixKit began and what it cost. My dad calls sometimes, leaves voicemails. Brief, awkward updates about his life. I save them all, though I rarely call back. Too much has happened, too many bridges burned, but I listen to every message, hearing the unspoken regret in his voice. Last week, a business school asked me to lecture on entrepreneurship and disruption. A student asked what inspired me to create FixKit. I thought carefully before answering. I was inspired by a man who threw my first idea in the trash. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. The audience applauded, unaware of the real story, the pain, the vindication, the hollow victory, the complicated healing. He wanted me to leave business to the men. Now I lead an empire, and he watches from the sidelines. But the empire is different than I imagined. It's not built on revenge anymore, but on innovation, on proving something to myself, not just to him. That's the legacy I'm creating now. One that doesn't require his approval to matter. One that's entirely my own.